Okay, wonderful. First of all, I want to thank Megan, Jim, and Flip, and everybody here at Whale Trust for their invitation for me to come talk to you all. It's really wonderful to be here again in person. Let's see if I can get this going. Okay, so we're going to continue on with the theme that Megan and Jim introduced, looking at the breeding grounds of the North Pacific humpback whale here. Let's see if I can get this to go. Okay, here we go. And so as Megan just told us, and as I think many of you already know very well, the Hawaiian archipelago does not end with Kauai. It actually stretches about 1,800 kilometers further to the northwest through islands and atolls and banks that make up the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. These islands, these atolls and banks basically used to be Hawaiian Islands like the one that we're sitting on today, but over geologic time have drifted to the northwest and subsided to below the surface of the water. Now, these are some of the most pristine marine habitats in the world and also some of the most remote, and so they've been relatively untouched by human exploitation. And today they make up what's known as the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, which is one of 17 marine protected areas managed by NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. So in today's presentation, we're going to be taking a little bit of a deeper dive into the Hawaiian breeding grounds and kind of expand our view from just looking at here in our backyard in Maui or even the main Hawaiian Islands and start looking at humpback whale presence across the entire archipelago. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge my collaborators and co-authors in this presentation, Beth Goodwin with the Jupiter Research Foundation, Kim Yano, and Aaron Olson from NOAA Fisheries, Anke Kugler, who's now with Syracuse University, Eden Zhang, who works with me at the Humpback Whale Sanctuary, Matt Harvey at Google, John Martinez, formerly of Papahanaumokuakea, and then Lula Hatch with the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries headquarters office. So as we've already heard, the Hawaiian Islands are the principal breeding ground of the North Pacific humpback whale population. As Megan just told us, there's about half of the population comes to Hawaii each year to breed. And when they come here, again, my talk's been made a lot easier because Jim and Megan have basically given half of it already. So, but when they come here, we know that they aggregate, like to aggregate in these shallow waters. And as a result, because we have so much shallow water here in the Maui Nui region, Maui Nui has traditionally been considered sort of the epicenter of the humpback whale population here in Hawaii. Now, in contrast, the banks and atolls of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands have traditionally received, comparably much less attention, and have been, kind of largely ignored by the research community, and that's in part because back in the 1970s there was some effort to go out and look for humpback whales through some flights and some Coast Guard surveys, but very few were found. Or really, just very, very little humpback whale activity was seen there, which led the late Lou Herman to conclude that in 1979 that there is no evidence really of current habitation of humpback whales in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, though he said that a few strays might be found there. So as a result, for a number of decades, the northwestern Hawaiian Islands largely went kind of ignored, of course, in large part also because they are so remote and because they're very difficult to access during the winter months when humpback whales are around, because of, the North Pacific is dominated by large storms and huge swells during that time of the year. So that started changing back in the roughly mid-2000s, around 2007, when a paper was published by Dave Johnson and his colleagues, where they did some modeling work, where they looked at the amount of available preferred humpback whale habitat across the entire archipelago, and basically concluded that about 2/3 of that habitat could be found in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. They also conducted a research cruise a 15-day research cruise to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. This was kind of in the latter part of the season from March 26th to April 12th in 2007. But they did make 9 sightings, totaling 19 whales, including some other calves and a small competitive pod. Now, around that same time, just a year or so later, myself and my colleagues started to do some acoustic monitoring in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And our goal was really primarily to monitor coral reefs, the sounds on coral reefs. But what we quickly found out was that there was a lot of humpback whale singing happening, or that we could pick up in our recordings. And what we ended up publishing is the evidence that we were picking up consistently humpback whale singing at all 6 of our monitor locations in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And furthermore, we were able to show that both the timing and the relative abundance of singing was really very similar to the patterns that we were observing off of Oahu at that time, kind of suggesting that there's some level of equivalency. So it wasn't until about 2019 that a NOAA ship was again used to survey the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. But even this one was, even though we managed to get up there, this was a cruise that was conducted in partnership with between the Pacific Island Fisheries Science Center and the Humpback Whale Sanctuary. The cruise was only able to go up there for about 6 days between April 4th and April 9th, so very late in the humpback whale season. But it did end up visiting 5 different locations along the archipelago: Middle Bank, Nihoa, Mokumanamana, also known as Necker Island, Lalo, also known as French Frigate Shoals, and then St. Rogation and Brooks Banks, which I've color-coded here so you can kind of orient yourself to where these different locations are. And even though this being late in the season and being a relatively short cruise, 148 humpback whales were sighted, including 55 at Middlebank, 30 at Nihoa, 40 at Mokumanamana, 12 at Lalo or French Frigate Shoals, and 16 at St. Rogation Bank. Now, of those 148 whales, we were able to establish fluke IDs or obtain fluke IDs from 46 of them, with 31 of those, about 67%, being matches between the northwestern Hawaiian Island and the main Hawaiian Islands using Happy Whale, which we've now heard a lot about. Of those, 24 were matched to Maui Nui, 6 to Kauai, 6 to Hawaii Island, and none to Oahu. But very interestingly, what we found was that there were fewer matches to the main Hawaiian Islands the further away we got from the main Hawaiian Islands. And so if you look at that plot there on the right-hand side, you see that, for example, the Middle Bank, which is the site that's closest to the main Hawaiian Island, about 87% of those whales match to the main Hawaiian Islands. However, as you go further up the chain, and by the time you get to St. Rogation Bank, only about 25% of those flukes were matched to the main Hawaiian Islands. So there's a decreasing amount of connectivity, it appears, to the main Hawaiian Islands the further you go to the northwest. Okay, and this brings me to the most recent effort to study whale presence in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And that is this, what's known as the SANCSOUND project. This was an Office of National Marine Sanctuary-wide effort that lasted for 3 years between about 2018 and 2021 to monitor the soundscape, so all the sounds basically occurring in 7 national marine sanctuaries, as well as Papahanaumokuakea. And the objective was to characterize the sounds that are there. So there were about 33 sites across the country, including 8 here in the Hawaiian Islands. And for our specific objective, we were interested in specifically looking at humpback whale presence. So why would we use acoustic monitoring? Well, as Jim has made very clear to us, many, if perhaps not even most, male humpback whales sing during the breeding season, as we heard. And that is very useful information to us because, as Jim showed us with the research with the wave glider that he demonstrated, it can tell us where humpback whales are present. But not only that, we can also say something about relative whale abundance, and that's because as more whales come into an area, they start to form a chorus, so they all are singing simultaneously. And I'm just going to play a little clip of what that sounds like here. So as you can imagine, as more humpback whales fill into an area, that chorusing gets louder and louder, and that's something that we can measure in terms of decibel levels. And we've shown now through work looking at both acoustic data and survey data, both vessel survey and land station data, that there's a very nice correlation in terms of as the decibel level increases, so the numbers of whales increase proportionally. So basically, we use acoustic monitoring because singing can tell us not only where and when humpback whales are occurring, but also to some extent the relative abundance. So I'm going to go over this figure to kind of give you a sense of what we're looking at here. You can see the data from the 8 different monitoring locations that we maintained, part of the SANCSOUND project. I've color coded the different graphs there on the left according to the location. And so what you can see from each of these 8 graphs that you see on the left, the horizontal axis is time. So you have the month of the season going from December through May, and then you see those 2 lines. You see a blue line, and that's basically showing you the percentage of time that humpback whale song was present at a particular location, as determined by a machine learning algorithm that we started using, developed by Google, that simply detects presence absence of singing in our recordings. And from this, you can see that at almost all the locations, there is consistent humpback whale singing from about January through March. Except the Pearl and Hermes Reef, far to the northwest, that blue star, where we see only kind of sporadic presence of humpback whale singing, and we kind of interpret that to mean that the whales are kind of primarily passing through there, not really necessarily stopping there and hanging out. But all of these places, had humpback whale presence. And the other thing that you see there is that red line, and that's basically a measure of the chorusing level, so the decibel level that was recorded over the course of the season. And from this, you can see that there are some interesting differences. We see that Maui Nui has the highest and most sustained level of humpback whale chorusing, but you also see high levels of chorusing on the Big Island, Hawaii Island, but also at French Frigate Shoals. We also see fairly high frequency, high level of chorusing at Middle Bank, although we had some problems with that recorder, so we only got a part of that season. Oahu and Kauai are kind of actually intermediate. And then you see kind of a low level of chorusing at Gardner Pinnacles, that purple star there in the middle. And that might make you think that maybe this is sort of the northwestern edge of where humpback whales might be occurring, because it seems to be kind of fading away there. But hold on to that thought, because we're going to return to it in just a minute. So the other way that we decided to explore humpback whale presence in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands was through the use of a wave glider. And both Jim and Megan have already kind of introduced us to it. But basically, this is, it's an autonomous surface vehicle that's powered by the sun and the waves. It's controlled via a satellite link. And basically, we can use it to survey the waters, basically continuously. And we work with a wave glider, the wave glider Europa, the same one that Jim used on those missions going to the west and east of Hawaii, operated by Jupiter Research Foundation. For us, the mission objectives were basically to survey the banks and shoals of Papahanaumokuakea for the presence of whale song, to determine just how widespread humpback whale presence is in the monument, and to figure out where there might be some, if there are any hot spots in the monument. So here you can see the path that the wave glider took. It left Pu'oko on the Big Island on January 10th of 2020. It did a wide arc around the main Hawaiian Islands to avoid any kind of vessel traffic. It entered the monument via Middle Bank. And from there, it traveled to the northwest, kind of hugging the southern and western sides of the banks and shoals that it encountered. It went as far as Lisiansky Island, a little bit past that, and then kind of rounded a seamount there and came back down the same way it came, just this time visiting the northern and eastern sides of the same banks it had previously visited. In total, it traveled over 2,600 nautical miles, made more than 92,000 one-minute recordings, and then returned to Pu'oko on March 14th. So this slide shows a synopsis of the detections that were made over the course of the mission. We used the same machine learning detection tool developed by Google that I described to you previously. And from here, you can see that the different size dots represent the different amounts of the different levels of humpback, or different amount of humpback whale singing that we recorded in any given hour. Okay, so it's the percentage of the hour that was recorded with humpback whale song presence. So the larger the dot, the more continuously we were hearing humpback whale singing. And what you can see, that humpback whale song was really present at nearly every atoll, bank, or shoal that the sea glider, or sorry, that the wave glider visited. Here you see a little closer look at where the detections occurred. I've arranged the figures so that you can see kind of the locations on the southeastern end of the archipelago to the lower right, and the northwestern end to the upper left. And what you can see is that we see a variable amount of whale song presence at the different locations. We see a lot of singing at Middlebank, which is relatively close to the main Hawaiian Islands, only about 50 nautical miles away. Also places like Mokumanamana, Northampton Seamount, and Raita Bank, and comparatively much less singing at places like St. Rogation Bank and Gardner Pinnacles. So to provide a little bit more quantitative perspective on this variability, I've arranged the amount of singing that we heard at each location in terms of the mean hourly proportion of recordings with whale song, again, arranged from the southeastern end of the archipelago on the right and the northwestern end on the left. And what you can see here is that we pick up a lot of humpback whale singing towards the southeastern end, around Middlebank, and then that gradually over as we get further to the northwest, it starts to drop off, and then we hit this sort of point where there's just a minimum amount of singing. There is a little bit, but very little at Gardner Pinnacle. But then, and this is the place, remember what I was mentioning with the moored acoustic recorders, where things started to fade away. But the wave gliders now is telling us that once you go past Gardner Pinnacle, actually humpback whale singing picks up again, and it's actually quite consistent. Lots of singing happening beyond Gardner Pinnacle, so between, for example, Raita Bank and Northampton Seamount. So what we're seeing really is that there appears to be kind of almost like a what we call bimodal distribution in terms of the presence of humpback whale singing. With there seems to be sort of some whales that seem to be more prevalent towards the southeastern end, and then this other sort of further to the northwest kind of grouping. Now, whether this represents sort of like one continuous population with the breaks for some reason around Gardner Pinnacle, or whether it perhaps represents two subpopulations, that's the question that we're still trying to grapple with and trying to understand, and try to figure out. Now, could there really be more than one sort of, population of whales occupying the Hawaiian archipelago? I mean, at this point, the short answer is, we don't know, but we know from all the work with Happy Whale that, we here in the main Hawaiian Islands, we get a lot of whales, from Southeast Alaska, from British Columbia, from the Gulf of Alaska, and so on. And comparatively, maybe a little bit fewer, coming from the Western Pacific. If we play a little bit with Google Earth, there's some interesting things to sort of think about. If we look at the distance between Southeast Alaska and Maui and compare that to the distance to let's say Mara Reef and the northwestern end of the archipelago, that distance is about equivalent. There's really not much difference from a whale's perspective. On the other hand, if we were to look at the distances from, let's say, the Western Aleutians, you see that it's about 1,000 kilometers further to come to Maui than it is to go to, let's say, to Mara Reef, and the same kind of holds from, if we're looking at whales from Russia, from Kamchatka and that area, it's about 1,200 miles further to come to Maui than to Mara Reef. So, it's probably, reasonable to assume that, we're probably equally likely to see whales from Southeast Alaska traveling to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands as they are to the main Hawaiian Islands. But it's probably more likely that we might see whales coming from the Western Pacific, so that area that Jim talked about, coming to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and perhaps the main Hawaiian Islands. So Jen, just to kind of wrap things up and summarize things, we now know that humpback whales are widely dispersed across the entire Hawaiian archipelago, well beyond the main Hawaiian Islands. And we know that whales in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands are clearly linked to the main Hawaiian Islands, but that linkage appears to get weaker the further that you go to the northwestern Hawaiian Island, go up to the northwest of the archipelago. And finally, the substantial presence of whales far to the northwest of the archipelago, along with that apparent break in occurrence around Garden Pinnacles, does raise some very interesting questions about whether potentially two subpopulations possibly coexist in the archipelago. And with that, I want to thank again all the folks at Whale Trust for their invitation for me to come talk to you, as well as all of the folks listed there on the left for their support over the years of this work. And thank you for your attention. And if there's time, I'll be happy to entertain some questions.
A quick question? Okay, we have time for one quick question if there's... Oh, right here.
Okay, so the whales prefer warmer water. How much colder is the water in the northern section? Yeah, so the question is, the whales prefer warmer waters, and how much colder is the water in the northwestern end of the archipelago? And so that was part of the work that Dave Johnson and his colleagues did in the 2007 paper. They basically showed that that habitat, so the temperature threshold seems to be just below Kure, Pearl and Hermes, and Midway. So everything below that seems to be well within that temperature range. So what we're finding is matching fairly well what those projections are, that not really a lot of consistent whale activity at the very, very far ends of the northwestern Hawaiian archipelago, but below that, the temperature seems to be just right, and there's lots of shallow water up there.